also just role-playing. There's a ton of flaws and ideals and elements and like twisted parts that you tie into your backstory that can have mechanical benefits or detriments. And it's like you're almost rewarded in ways of making the most messed up person, or making like a twisted macabre or a very dark mirror of yourself. And everybody's there for it because it's about the story, and the story is dark cosmic horror. So you have people that are unstable. You don't have the stalwart, plucky hero. That's not the norm. And when does that become a trope? That everybody's got a dark backstory and twisted. But I love seeing that as a completely flip of the table, quite literally, into this other world of popular tabletop scenarios.
So I have a quick mechanics question, because I am completely like alien, not to Call of Cthulhu, right? I've heard anecdotal like story details, but I haven't ever heard like the mechanics. So are you mechanically rewarded when your character is corrupted? So like it's like, yeah, you might experience madness, but you also get like an additional power or something. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It seems like a narrative benefit that and I shouldn't even say it like that. It also depends on the keeper, the GM, of how they run things. So you might be seeing ghosts, and that is a detriment to your sanity, and you're encouraged to role play that and to really lean into that. However, by seeing ghosts, that might provide, I can talk to the dead person that died in this building, and I'm privy to information that others might not be. However, I'm also going slowly insane. So there's like a risk and reward that's coming from trying to tell a more interesting and deeper story, but then there are also detriments to it because you look crazy. But maybe you get information that is actually right.
Well, and to me, that is a mechanical benefit. You change the game state once you understand more information. In game design, this is the difference between what's called a perfect and an imperfect game, right? So a perfect game is when all players involved have all of the information available at all times. So an example of this would be like chess or checkers, right? There's never a point in chess or checkers where the only limitation is whatever you've been trained to, right? But theoretically, both players know how to castle. Both players know how pawns work, Both players understand the objective of the game. So that's considered a perfect game because, you can't hide anything. If you have infinite foresight, right? You're able to understand based on each other's moves, exactly how the game is going to turn out, which is why a lot of times chess grandmasters, it's like you don't get to checkmate because they understand, they can see 15 turns ahead. Nope, they've already got me in checkmate already, Whereas an imperfect game is where knowledge is hidden or information is hidden. So Magic the Gathering is a good example of that. You don't know what card you're going to draw next. You don't know what cards are in your opponent's hand. You don't know, your opponent's strategy or win condition, right? You're playing more probability and information gathering than you are necessarily trying to just outposition the other person. So in this way, I actually find that information is a game mechanic. And if you have the risk be your sanity score, right? Which I'm guessing it's like a quantity. There's a quantity.
It's a
when
quantity,
it comes to sanity. Yeah. In order to get more information, it might be more story driven and it might be more, the purpose is immersion, but it's still a game. It's a systemized mechanic that impacts the narrative, hitting that ludonarrative harmony,
Yeah. And I've seen narratives where people, they start to lose that sanity. And they might have, they even have a checkbox in the character sheet that says temporarily insane or indefinitely insane. And it's been a character's arc to fight their way out of madness and to discover what the source of their madness was. I had this weird parasitic thing that was a sentient being from this other plane that was attached to me. And then by ridding the world of that, your sanity has returned. And all your memories are back. And what? And then they have to also deal with that, Whiplash. They played an insane investigator. Now they're not insane anymore. Those are mechanical elements. Then there are immersion elements, and they're all woven together very, very well. This is also a game where low numbers are helpful. A lot of things are done with a percentile die, and you need to roll below whatever your score is. So you start with a certain score, and there's a lot of multipliers and whatnot when you make your character. It's weird to have a strength of 75, but that means if I roll a 74 or lower, I'm successful in whatever my thing was that I was trying to do. But say my score gets dropped in some way, now my range of success continues to shrink, and that's kind of where it all flows. They're all on scales of 100 basically, and then there are ways you can push and mess with luck for that.
So the other thing that this kind of brings up, because it's interesting that you said this kind of excites players that are looking for their character to be corrupted. D&D already also has this kind of game style in its adventure Descent into Avernus, which is one of the key questions that the designers ask is, can you get through this adventure and still be a good person? Because the environment rewards you for allowing corruption into you, right? So even piloting one of the infernal war machines requires sacrificing a soul to power the machine. So if you're a cleric or a paladin and you're lawful good, that might really tear at you, even though you could probably weasel your way out of the moral question of, well, what was the soul doing here? They must have been an evil soul to end up here. So for me, I would want to play this game and challenge myself by trying to be a good person.
Yeah.
And even though it's a dark world, can I rise above it? Or is there going to be a point where I literally can't progress in the game without compromising the morality of the character I'm trying to play? To me, that's almost playing the game on hard mode, because it's rewarding you for accepting that corruption. And you even though there is a risk, you're judging the risk, right? Choosing not to be corrupted, if you even have that choice, because I'm assuming there's a lot of randomness involved in determining how much madness you actually take in or whatever, along with some choice. Again, I'm completely unfamiliar with the system. For example, do I risk relinquishing my mechanical benefits to keep my morality, even though I'm losing out on information and stuff? Is there a way I can actually play through the game like that? Right. But I do think there are two types of players when it comes to creating their character, and there's more than two. But I'm setting up these two examples, which is players that like discovering their character through play and through happenstance, and players that like to intentionally create the story because they want to really dive deep in. This sounds like a system that rewards the former and discourages the latter, because your investigator can die at any moment.
Yeah, I was actually going to go back to what you were initially talking about, where you have players who are making multiple characters in advance of this session or this campaign. And I thought that was interesting because it implies that the player characters are more, I guess you could say, normal or average than in D&D, where even though both character types have the same stats, not the same stats, but you're strong in some areas or weak in other areas. I would argue that in Call of Cthulhu, it sounds more like you're playing a normal person in this cosmic horror, a person who just happens to have survived and is going through all of these experiences, and whether or not they die is really up in the air, depending on what they encounter.
I don't want to misrepresent the theming of the game. It is the idea that investigators are exceptional people, but they come from all walks of life. So your occupation that grants you your trained skills, if you want to target it like that, that's your starting point. But then there's no capstone to your occupation. It's not a class. After that point, you're just a dude, and you're a person now navigating these places. It puts a lot more onus on less about level progression and a lot more about role-playing progression.
Yeah, no, I got you there. I just thought it was interesting because by creating just the simple act of creating multiple characters and preparing to die or something in Call of Cthulhu, it makes it so that there's a precariousness in how you create these characters. You kind of need to make them really quickly, presumably, because I know that when I started making D&D characters, it took me like 2 hours or something to figure it out. Plus, I was trying to understand some backstory questions and how I wanted to write it, because I love to creatively write my backstories. But with these, it sounds like you're a lot less invested until they survive longer. And that's a style of play that you can also see in D&D. There are a lot of people who like dungeon crawling, for example, or Dungeon of the Mad Mage, or Tomb of Annihilation, where you prepare multiple characters just in case something goes wrong, and you don't want to take, a few hours to roll up another character. But what I was getting at is that in D&D, the DM, I feel, at least I feel that these days we as DMs are leaning more towards, although terrible things can happen to your character, we'd prefer it if they not die, because we are enjoying the story so far that we're creating, or the story that we planned out. So if a character dies and you've written this whole backstory, it can feel a lot less rewarding in Dungeons and Dragons. But in Call of Cthulhu, you don't have to worry about that, because you haven't made a whole backstory. You maybe have a couple of traits, but you're exploring them as it... I'm not saying you don't. I'm sure plenty of people do that, but I feel like there's less incentive to create a whole unifying backstory for what's going on, at least based on how it sounds.
So I'm not quite... Yeah, the next breadth in that is I'm surprised by that pre-framing, because there's a whole chunk in character creation that's make yourself a background, make out all your flaws and your traits and your good, like all your different traits, and really think deeply about who this person is and how they behave. And it isn't like, okay, session 1, 5 minutes in, you're dead, but it's because the majority of your stuff is, as even combat is like, there's not really an initiative count. It's narrative. It's all spoken, and a lot of it is theater of the mind. It uses props for things, for different immersions that you're supposed to like physically interact with while you're playing. And if you're not interacting with them, you're not using them. It's a very theater, not even just theater of the mind, because you have some theater in it. There's a lot of preparing your acting chops to then play this character. So there's definitely time that you spend building up the background of this creature. They're not just some flunky. You're supposed to think deeply about who they are, and do all that work, and then pre-frame the players to say, and they might die.
I guess, is this a more accurate way to put it? You're playing less who the character is, and you're more excited about the changes that will happen to them, right?
Yes.
So it's for players that are invested in the process of playing and change, rather than delving deep into who they already are. Because that's another way to put it, like when I'm playing Solomon and Grey Owls, like, of course there are things that are going to change. In the finale, his emotional dampening was taken away from him. So he had to deal with this new thing, and that's gonna lead to further role-playing stuff. But I think what Ian's trying to say is you're not invested in who the character already is, because you know they're going to change. So even though you ask yourself, who is my character? What is their backstory? How does that influence their behavior? All the usual stuff. If you invest yourself in who they are already, you're going to be unable to role play out the changes that are going to happen over the course of play.
Thank you so much for listening to some of our podcast highlights. This podcast is part of the Dartmoor Podcast Network. If you want to support the content creators, feel free to visit our Patreon. And please, game responsibly.